Okay, I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Okay. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Done. Okay. Just gonna peacefully wait for chat to join. Chat, you shall join. Do 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 do. Da, 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 da. Hello. Okay, my thing wasn't working for a little bit. My audio wasn't working for a little bit, but we're back up. It works. It works now. I just had to restart my computer. For some reason, it wasn't working. So yeah, welcome back, everybody. I have to lower this because it's really loud on my side. Is this loud enough, or does it need to be louder or softer? Oh, look, it's a fox. Is it like perfect, or is it like too loud or something? Just making sure everything's perfect so that when I'm reading, I don't need to like stop, you know? So yeah. It's good? Okay, good. What's this? Okay, this is not good. I'm gonna change to a new one. This one is a bad one because it changes for some reason. Okay, let's see. Okay, there you go. It should be enough. Okay. Bah. We're gonna go search Passerine. Okay, wait, gonna fix. There we go. Passerine, we're on Passerine chapter 3. Back to Passerine chapter 3. Where is next chapter? Okay. Are you guys ready? Okay, you should probably plug in your phone. Go plug in your phone, get some tea, get some water, get some popcorn if you wanna. Tell me when you're ready. Because once you guys say you're ready, and I will start reading. That's chat. I always give chat its own separate window. So yeah. You know, I'll start a little DVR. Okay, tell me when you're ready, and I will go ahead and do my thing. What am I doing? Okay. I'll probably give you like, how long? How long should I give you guys? Maybe like 3 minutes. I'll give you guys 3 minutes to get ready. Or if you want me to just like start now, then just tell me. It's 9:58 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? Okay, you ready? I'm gonna guess that the others are ready. Yeah. Okay. This isn't relaxing. Okay, let's just do jazz with fire. Okay. I'm just checking the audio. I think this is good. No, that's good. Okay, so Passerine is a story that I read yesterday. Passerine, so the story that I read yesterday, pretty much, Passerine is Sleepy Boys Incorporated fan fiction that is actually really good. Like, I read it and I completely forgot that they're actually like Minecraft YouTubers because it's written really well. So, pretty much, here's a summary of the past 2 chapters. There is a guy named Technoblade. He's immortal, and he has voices in his head that always say blood for the blood god. So, he goes around killing in wars, like being in wars, being stuff like that. And he meets this other guy who's the angel of death. His name is Philza. Philza and him become friends because Philza is also immortal. And yeah, they become friends, and they pretty much live a life together until boom, he just suddenly disappears, and then Technoblade becomes a sad boy, and he ends up participating in more wars and not caring about his and subjecting himself to his killing sprees, but he's not satisfied with it. And one day he goes to this one kingdom, and they're not scared of him like usual, and he just waltzes in, and he meets 2 children, Wilbur and Tommy. Wilbur is the older one and is very quiet and super into books. Tommy is very loud, obnoxious, and easily captures people's hearts. Then afterwards, they meet their father, which just so happens to be Philza, and they have a talk about how he left him and blah, blah, blah. And then Philza begs him to help him. Philza begs Technoblade to help him because Wilbur and Tommy are mortals, but Wilbur is starting to hear voices in his head like Technoblade. So he decides to stay, and he starts training Wilbur with fighting skills. And their mom is actually really sick, but she was doing better one day, so she came out and she pretty much had a nice time with her sons and with Technoblade. And then she dies, and she dies, and then what happens? Yeah, so she dies, and Philza leaves them. And that's the end of the chapter. That's pretty much my summary of the 2 chapters. So yeah, you will now proceed to read Passerine. Okay, double check y'all are ready. I know one of y'all said you're ready. I'm gonna make sure everyone else is ready, so that don't start without. So that you just start and people aren't ready. I wanted to be that guy. I'll give you like 2 minutes. Unless you guys say that you're ready. I also need time to like chill my voice out, so I'm not saying this super, yeah, cool. Okay. Ready? Okay. Chapter 3, When the Cold Wind Rolls from the North. I'm gonna skip the summary because there might be spoilers. Chapters trigger warnings. Okay, so if you're sensitive, then please just mute the stream or something. So there are panic attacks, so if you're sensitive, please just mute the stream and stuff, yeah. And then I will tell chat to tell you guys when I'm not reading anymore. So yeah. Tommy knew a thing or Tommy knew a thing or two about secrets. He was 5 years old when he first. Sorry, redo. Never happened. Okay, it's always like this in the beginning. Tommy knew a thing or two about secrets. He was 5 years old when he first heard the word whispered from father to son. Let's keep this a secret, all right, Will? Dad had said in the gentle hush of midnight, unaware that Tommy was right outside the library door, hanging onto every word. Even then, Tommy must have known Wilbur was special. If Dad was speaking to him like that, not like he was an annoying child, but like they were equals, bearing the same burdens and battle scars. Okay, in a second, this Christmas music is really distracting, so let's go back to Minecraft music. Yep. I think this one was good. Okay, there you go. But what if they never go away? Wilbur had whispered back. Tommy had never heard his older brother so frightened. Tommy walking away before he could hear the rest of the conversation he was obviously not privy to. Looking back, perhaps some of him wanted to preserve his gilded image of his older brother, like a dead fossil crystallized in amber. Because older brothers were never scared. Older brothers never bled. Alright. Older brothers never cowered. Older brothers were immortal. He would hold on to that belief until it was too late. He was 6 years old when he got a secret to keep of his own and truly understood its burden. A year later, his brother is crowned. Tommy stood proudly in the crowd as Wilbur kneeled before a man in white robes. The sunlight from the windows caught in the jewels of the crown held over Wilbur's head. I have to fix the audio. Okay. A crown that was once their father's, but no longer. Wilbur recited oaths of protection and generosity, goodness and fairness, righteous justice and unwavering fealty to the kingdom. And the robed man proclaimed him King Wilbur, protector of the realm, ruler of the kingdom. Long may he reign. Tommy had cheered the loudest, enough to shake the rafters above, and when Wilbur smiled, he knew it was just for him. 2 years later, on the cusp of his 10th birthday, Tommy asked Technoblade the same question he'd been asking since they met. "Will you train me?" This time, Technoblade said yes. Time unfurled like unbound parchment, rolling off into the distance without Tommy's notice. They grew together, him and his king brother. Taller and broader, stronger and smarter. More Wilbur for the latter, if Tommy were to be honest. Wilbur's duties took him from Tommy more often than not, but that was alright too, because Tommy had Techno. They would spar and talk until Techno was inevitably called back to the king's side, but by then Tommy was appeased. The days he was alone were the worst, but mostly indistinguishable in their monotonous quiet. Sorry, I don't know how to read hard words. On one of those days, he found himself drifting aimlessly through the castle, halfway down a vaguely familiar hallway. He heard something that had been sorely missed since his mother's death: music. He followed the sound to a door that was slightly ajar. Tommy held his breath as he looked through the crack, and then lost his breath altogether when he found the source of the mournful melody. Wilbur, tiredness etched into the slope of his shoulders and the skin under his eyes, strumming his guitar, cursing as he missed a note or two, but still continuing, still playing, still soldiering on. And with him was Technoblade, on a sweetly keening violin, his scarred hands moving gently over the strings, his bow arm moving fluidly through the air. Both of them had their eyes closed, so completely lost to their own music, and Tommy knew deep in his gut that this was a world he could never breach. And so he closed the door and retreated to his silence. At 15 years old, Tommy was the oldest he'd ever been, but he never felt so young. Wilbur's official chambers were not meant for those outside of his council, but Tommy had never been one for rules. The guard outside the carved double doors, truly pretentious in Tommy's correct opinion, merely sighed at the sight of Tommy coming down the hallway, and shuffled to the side to let him pass. "His Majesty has a lot of paperwork to do," the guard said, trying and failing to be stern. "If so, then His Majesty would certainly welcome my esteemed company," Tommy replied, giving the guard a grin and salute as he pushed his way into the king's office. Beyond the door was a large, sparsely decorated room. There used to be paintings on the walls of past kings, their forefathers, with gold hair and brilliant blue eyes. But the first thing Wilbur had done as king was take them all down. Tommy remembered sitting on the floor of the offices, staring up as Wilbur climbed a ladder, rolled his sleeves up to his elbow, and began ripping the paintings from their hooks. There had been such violence in his movements, as if the task was the very bane of his existence. Once it was done, Wilbur stood in the center of his devastation, taking in the bare walls, and nodded once to himself, pleased. Tommy still didn't know if Wilbur even noticed he was there too. The only paintings on the walls now were the landscapes Mama used to make. Tommy's favorite was the one of a mountain range shrouded in blue mist, because he could see in the corner where Mama had given him the brush for a few seconds 3 errant brush strokes in an otherwise perfect painting that stood as a reminder that, once upon a time, Tommy had existed in the same universe as his mother. Bookshelves stood against one wall, with the other 2 set with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens outside. At the center of all things was a desk and a king. Wilbur sat scribbling away at a roll of parchment. His crown lay discarded beside his ink pot and a cup of cold tea. "What are you doing?" Tommy asked, closing the door behind him. Wilbur didn't reply. He gave no indication of even hearing him. Tommy rolled his eyes and produced 2 apples from his pockets. He made his way over to the desk, moved over a stack of heavy, important-looking books, and hauled himself up to a sitting position, his legs dangling over the edge. You've been here all day, you know," Tommy said, idly balancing one of the apples on the tip of his finger. "Missed breakfast and lunch." Wilbur only grunted in response. "Kingdom's on fire," Tommy continued, rioting in the streets. "The gods are staging a coup. Techno is leading them." "Sure, Tommy," Wilbur said non-committedly, reaching to dip his quill into the ink pot. Tommy casually moved the ink pot out of his reach. Wilbur glared up at him, finally acknowledging him, albeit with annoyance. "What do you want, Tommy?" Wilbur asked, irritable. Tommy took one of the apples and planted it squarely in front of his brother. "Starvation's a pretty bad way to go," Tommy said. "Find a less dumb way to die." Wilbur stared down at the fruit as if he'd never seen one before. "I'm not hungry," he said. At the exact moment his stomach started to growl. Tommy snorted. "How embarrassing of you." "Shut up." But Wilbur was putting down his quill and reaching for the apple. Tommy bit into his own hide to hide his self-satisfied smile. Tommy leaned over to catch a glimpse of what Wilbur was writing. His brother's familiar looping script had already covered most of the page with words like intentions and fortifications and conscription. "Conscription?" Tommy repeated around a mouthful of apple. "What does that mean?" "Swallow before speaking," Wilbur said mildly. "Swallow before speaking," Tommy mocked. "You sound like our old governess. So grouchy, ah!" He inhaled too quickly. Unchewed apple slid suddenly down his throat and lodged there. Tommy gasped for air, reaching blindly for something to drink. Wilbur hastily placed his teacup into Tommy's hand, and he drank it down with gusto until his airways were clear once more. When he looked at his brother through a blur of tears, Wilbur was desperately pursing his lips in a valiant fight to keep his laughter down. "You're a jerk," Tommy whispered, "and your tea is garbage." Wilbur swiped a thumb across his own mouth to wipe a smile away. "Techno made that tea." "Oh." Tommy looked down at the tiny teacup with curiosity. He could not imagine his hardened tutor patiently brewing tea for anyone, even Wilbur. "So right then." "Tommy." Wilbur placed his elbow on the desk and rested his cheek against the heel of his hand. The look he gave Tommy was one of the utmost affection, despite the obvious exhaustion etched into every inch of his face. "Will you ever grow out of your hero worship for him?" Tommy took another, considerably smaller bite of his apple. He chewed on the sweet pulp, thinking all the while of the pink-haired tutor that had taught him and Wilbur all they knew of survival, and not just through fighting. Techno could have left. He should have left. After those long nights of Tommy waking up and crying, Wilbur's dark moods, days where both of them felt so afraid that unraveling each other felt like the only way to fix it. A frustration and anger with no other way out other than screaming. But he stayed. He stayed to watch Wilbur be crowned, stayed to be his most trusted advisor, stayed and kept him together when everyone else was expected the boy king to fall apart under the pressure. He stayed and marked Tommy's height on one of the statues in the training pavilion, despite his insistence that Tommy had not grown an inch. He stayed even after Wilbur forced him to attend balls and galas, and endured each one of Tommy's jibes about the pompous suits he was made to wear. How on earth could Tommy grow out of worshipping someone like that? Tommy swallowed, shrugged. Maybe if you were awesome, I'd hero worship you too. Wilbur scoffed. I am awesome. Wilbur, if you have to say I'm awesome to prove that you're awesome, you're not awesome. Do you remember, Wilbur said suddenly, straightening his seat and staring at the blood-red fruit in his hand, when we used to pick teeth with Mother? And Dad, Tommy almost added before catching himself. We'd go down the orchids with big whisker baskets, Tommy remembered. You used to lift me up on your shoulders so I could get the ones on the higher branches. A wistful smile tugged on Wilbur's lips. I probably can't lift you now. Not that heavy. Wilbur shook his head. It's not a matter of whether I could. It's a matter of whether you'd let me. I can't read in British. Tommy opened his mouth to retort, then quickly shut it when he realized it was true. He probably wouldn't appreciate being on Wilbur's shoulders, nor would he even need to. He'd hit his ghostbur sometime last year, incensing Techno greatly when it was clear Tommy would be taller than him if he kept up the pace. That meant he would soon be taller than Wilbur, too. We could just try shooting apples down with arrows, Tommy offered gently. I'll try not to shoot you. I'll try not to shoot for the... Sorry, I have to read this. I'll try not to shoot for your eye this time, Wilbur replied with a laugh. I don't remember much about her, Tommy admitted as he rolled his apple between his palms, as if that could somehow make her distant laughter clearer in his head. But I remember how much she loved those apple-picking days. We would be there until midnight, if she got her way. She used to gather the apple blossoms and toss them at us, just to make us laugh whenever we complained we were getting bored. No, Wilbur said quietly. That was Father. Tommy wanted to kick himself. Oh, well, sorry, I guess. I told you I don't really remember. It's alright, Tommy. There's no need to apologize. Wilbur tossed his apple high into the air and caught it gracefully with one hand. He abandoned you too. Thank you, Potato. Right. They polished off the rest of their apples in silence. Neither of them saying another word about the phantoms that had been hanging over them for nearly a decade. It seemed to Tommy that people were haunted by the two types of ghosts, the ghosts of those who died and those who left. It was just his luck that he had both. When they were both done, Wilbur silently wrapped the cores in an extra sheet of parchment and placed it on the edge of his table for later disposal. As he did, Tommy's attention was drawn back to the letter Wilbur had been working on when he entered. You didn't answer my question, Tommy said, idly kicking his heels against Wilbur's desk. What does conscription mean? Wilbur sighed as he took up his quill again. You don't need to know, Tommy. Tommy bristled at the careless dismissal. I'm a prince of this kingdom, Wilbur. I deserve to know. Wilbur quirked an eyebrow at him. Oh, suddenly you're interested in the affairs of the realm? I've always been interested. What's our highest earning exported product then? Tommy scanned the table. Apples? Tea? Parchment? Wilbur rolled his eyes. You are a ridiculous child. He began scribbling away at the letter once more. I am not a child, Tommy murmured. You are. Look at yourself. You're supposed to be a prince, yet you spend your days play fighting with Techno, or annoying the gods, or annoying me. What part of your behavior isn't childlike? Wilbur's quill stopped in the middle of a sentence as his words settled over him. Tommy felt heat rise to his cheeks and hurriedly got to his feet before Wilbur could see. His gut churned at the insult, and the lingering taste of apple in his tongue turned rancid and bitter. Tommy, Wilbur called, but Tommy was already making his way towards the door. Tommy, wait. You're not the boss of me! Tommy spat without turning, lacing his words with venomous anger. I am, actually, but that's besides the point. Tommy heard Wilbur's seat scrape against the floor, but no footsteps running after him. Tommy! You're proving my point if you walk out that door. I don't care. I don't know. I don't know what to replace that with. I don't care. I hate you, Wilbur. I hate you. Tommy threw the doors open, startling the guard outside. He marched past the threshold, slapping at his cheeks as if that might somehow dissipate the shame gathering there. He shouldn't be this angry, all three of them. Techno, Wilbur, and Tommy himself have said worse things in the past, to and about each other, but seldom did it ever sting like this. Perhaps because it came in the wake of their father's memory being conjured between them. Perhaps because it had been their first proper conversation in a week. Perhaps because Wilbur was right. Wilbur was always right. The dorm slammed shut behind him, echoing through the empty hallway. Come on, Tommy prayed. Run after me. But the door stayed closed, and that was answer enough. Tommy found Techno in the training pavilion, practicing his lunges with the silver trident Wilbur had gifted him a few years back. Technoblade took one look at the expression of Tommy's face, and tossed him a spear that had been leaning against one of the statues. Wordlessly, they took their positions in the middle of the pavilion, sizing each other up for a moment before jumping into action. After 6 years under Techno's tutelage, Tommy could hold his own against knights twice his age and size. He even beaten Wilbur in once, though the older sibling profusely maintained that he was going easy on Tommy, but he had never beaten Techno. Tommy was sure even Wilbur, who had been training with Techno for longer, had never won against their tutor. In a truly bleak moment when he was 13, Tommy eventually realized that the man they were fighting against might not even be using his full strength. But that didn't matter now. It was about winning this time. Tommy rushed Techno with his visceral scream, a sound that came from deep within his chest. Techno deflecting him easily enough, but Tommy continued on the onslaught, dealing blow after teeth-shattering blow. He kept screaming through it all, screaming nonsensically, screaming at his brother, at his dad, at his kingdom, at the gods themselves. He felt as if his throat might tear itself apart. Tommy managed to push Techno back towards one of the statues, the one that bore marks of Tommy's height over the years. Techno grunted as Tommy shoved the butt of his spear against Techno's chest, and then retaliated by catching its shaft in the prongs of his trident. Sorry, I'm like burping. With a single jerk of his arm, Techno ripped the spear out of Tommy's hands. It clattered to the floor somewhere behind Tommy, but that didn't stop him. He balled up his fist and hit indiscriminately at Techno, his knuckles finding an arm, a rib, a collarbone. Give me a moment, it's getting really hot. I need to remove my sweater. Anyways, back to business. And Techno merely stood there, taking all of it. He let Tommy burn his anger away into exhaustion without a word of protest. When Tommy collapsed to the ground, a heaving, sweaty mess, Techno silently placed his own weapon to the side and lay down beside him. They spent half an hour just like that, staring up at the roof, listening to Tommy's harsh breathing slowly wind down. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Silence was a language in and of itself, and Techno was the most fluent in it. And so he was the one who knew just how to break it. Let me guess, Techno drawled. You and Wilbur had a fight again. Tommy exhaled through his nose. Called me annoying child, he muttered. He does that every day, Tommy. I know, but it was different this time, though. He might have actually meant it. Ah! There was a rustle of fabric as Techno crossed his arms under his head. Well, Wilbur's not having a very fun week, so I take anything he says with a grain of salt. I wouldn't know that, Tommy grumbled. Neither of you tell me anything. You never expressed a desire to be told. I would have appreciated being told regardless. Noted then. Another moment of silence stretched before Tommy whispered, He didn't even run after me. He would have before. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Techno shift, so he was looking down at him, arms braced against the floor. When Techno spoke again, his voice was patient. Before what? Before he was king? Tommy sighed. He felt his lungs had come loose in all the chaos. Everything in his chest was all too tight, all too sore. He closed his eyes against the pain, seeing his brother in the darkness, brown curls falling over his eyes as he bent over his guitar, smiling at his own music. Tommy would give anything to hear Wilbur play like that again. No, Tommy began, rethinking his words when he said, even as he was saying them. Being king has nothing to do with it. It was different before he started choosing being king over being my brother. Oh, Tommy. The sadness in Techno's voice made Tommy's eyes snap open. You think he has a choice? Tommy rolled over to finally look Techno in the eye. Not much has changed with Techno over the years. He still kept his hair long and occasionally let Tommy braid it. His hands remained as scarred as ever, with some fresh ones now and again from adventures he told no one about. And he still wore shirts with too many ruffles for Tommy's taste, but he no longer had the emerald earring he used to wear when they were younger. Tommy couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Techno with it. In its place was the sapphire Tommy had given him 2 years ago, mostly as a joke, and he'd only admit he was pleased to see Techno wearing it under the threat of death. Techno's expression was shuddered. Techno's expression was shuddered. In that way of his whenever uncomfortable topics came up. In that way? Sorry, the English here makes no sense. Techno's expression was shuddered. In that way of his whenever uncomfortable topics came up. His past, state secrets, dad. Something's really happening, Tommy said, watching Techno's face carefully. Something bad. Techno's face remained unchanged, save for the telltale quirk at the corner of his mouth that signaled his anger. Tommy had only seen Techno truly angry a handful of times, and was not eager to add to that list. Things are a bit fragile now, Techno said. But I'm trying, I really am. And I need you to know that, Tommy. I do, Tommy said resolutely. I trust you. Because while Techno had stayed when Tommy and Wilbur were at their worst, they'd repaid him in kind. A few years into Wilbur's reign, Techno had taken up to studying on statesmanship and politics and etiquette, as if his very life depended on it. It was the only aspect he was lacking in, he said. It was the only aspect he was lacking in, he'd said. And he needed to cover for Wilbur when push came to shove on the debate floor. And while Tommy and Wilbur couldn't understand his sudden zeal, they still knew that their tutor needed rest as much as any other human being. So they developed their own systems of getting Techno to eat and drink, and oftentimes had to physically pry him away from the library. Techno eventually relented to calming down after he knocked Wilbur to the ground in one of their struggles to get him to bed. Huh? Yes? Wait. Oh, that's Kelp. Hi, Kelp. I'm reading Passerine. I'm gonna pull it up on my phone instead because this is kind of hard reading on my screen on my computer. Chapter 3. We're on chapter 3. Okay, when I get past I suggested a solution, I will scroll down. It's not DreamsmP, it's whatchamacallit. It's not DreamsmP, it's Sleepy Boys Incorporated. So it's I think, yeah, Sleepy Boys Incorporated. So it's like Tommy, Wilbur, Techno, Philza, I think. Yeah, I think so. I think he's part of that, I think. But I don't think Technoblade is technically in the family. I don't know anything about this. I just like the story. Wait, where am I? We got under with large. Okay, I think I'm not a child. You are. Blah blah blah. Is that everyday Tommy? No, Tommy. Oh, Tommy. Okay, there you go. And when he sometimes disappeared in the middle of the night, or went off to God's nowhere for days on end, they'd simply welcome him back when he was ready, no questions asked, partly because the look on Techno's face after his little escapades implied that whoever asked would be thrown over a balcony. If things are so bad, then why are you here? But if things are so bad, then why are you here then? Tommy asked. Shouldn't you be at the king's side, sir right-hand man? Techno wrinkled his nose in response. Oh, laughter bubbled out of Tommy. The unbidden but welcome. Sorry, I can't read. I see. He kicked you out too, didn't he? I suggested a solution that would end all of our problems very easily. Wilbur vetoed it. Adamantly. There you go. Tommy grinned. So you're throwing a tantrum. Techno scoffed. I am not you, Tommy. He paused. But I suppose under the dictionary definition of a tantrum, I am currently in the middle of one. Tommy began to laugh. That sort of laugh that ended in wheezing and hiccups. Techno watched him with a faint smile, and the two of them basked in the simplicity of it. Just the two boys on the floor, on a hot summer day, laughter bouncing off their skin like sunlight. He'll be okay, Techno, Tommy assured him once he settled down. I mean, it's you and Wilbur. You'll figure it out like you always do. Techno stared at Tommy for a moment before quickly looking away. That's enough saccharine garbage for one day, I think. Get up so I can beat you to the ground again. What does saccharine mean? It means you need to brush up on your vocabulary, Tommy. Techno got to his feet and offered Tommy a hand. Tommy grinned as Techno pulled him up, and though his palm was scarred, it was warm. Tommy rolled his shoulders back until he heard the satisfying pop of his bones righting themselves. He and Techno had sparred until the sun went down, at which point a messenger had arrived to inform Techno that King Wilbur had said uncle and was crying for help. Not in those words, but close enough in interpretation. Go, Tommy had encouraged when Techno had hesitated on the steps leading down from the training pavilion. At least one of us is welcome back in His Majesty's good graces. He should be looking for a way back into yours, Techno had replied and was gone. Okay. Tommy had spent the rest of the evening stabbing at a training dummy with a spear, until another servant arrived to call him to dinner, which, unsurprisingly, he ate alone in an empty dining room. Afterwards, he'd made up his mind to swallow his pride and found his way back to Wilbur's offices. The guard's standing post outside was gone, which meant that Techno was still inside. After all, who needs guards with Technoblade there? As Tommy drew nearer, voices had begun to filter in through the door, muffled but getting clearer as he approached. Quiet today, someone was saying, but that hardly means anything. But that hardly means anything. I think they know something I don't, Techno. Tommy held his breath as he pressed his ear against the door. Did you do the breathing exercises I taught you? Techno's soft drawl. I did. Of course I did. I did everything you said. I always do. Wilbur's fraught murmur. Then why don't you let me do this for you? Do what? Tommy had leaned in as close as he dared. Because it wouldn't help, Wilbur had said. It sounded as if this was an argument they'd had a million times before. We don't know why they're gathering at the border yet. You studied history. You know nothing good ever comes from that sort of maneuver, Wilbur. Meanwhile, the longer we wait, the less prepared we'll be when they... if they do, Wilbur interrupted. We're not entirely unprepared. I sent the conscription notices. There was a loaded pause. You did? Tommy didn't know if Techno sounded more impressed or indignant. When? This afternoon, after my little brother looked at me this afternoon when my little brother looked at... I literally can't read it, I'm so sorry. This afternoon, after my little brother looked me in the eyes, and I realized how much I have to lose. At that point, Tommy had backed hastily from the door, as if it burned him. He turned on his heels and ran, his head spinning and his heart hammering, unsure whether to laugh or to cry. Something bad was really happening, something that made Wilbur think he was going to lose everything. Tommy didn't pay much attention to his history tutors. They were never as amazing as Technoblade was, but he did know that his family had maintained peace in the kingdom for decades, and that talks about borders were never joyful affairs. Wait, I already went too far. Wait, where am I? Never joyful affairs. Okay, there we go. Give me a second. Okay. Now, in the silence of his bedroom, he paced, working out the kinks in his body and trying hard to ignore the gnawing feeling that he had was on the brink of something too large to comprehend. But there was one thing he knew for certain. None of this would be happening if their father had stayed. Techno did. Even when they'd only known him for a few months. What had stopped him from doing the same? And then there was the guilt of knowing exactly what could have made him stay, And then there was the guilt of knowing what could have made him stay, what could have had been. Guys, I'm so sorry. This is so confusing. But there was one thing he knew for and then there was the guilt of knowing exactly what could have made him stay, what could have been done, secrets, what terrible heavy things. Tommy was still wearing a path through his rug when the knock came, startling him out of his thoughts. Yes, he called, suddenly getting the urge to reach for one of the decorative swords hanging from his wall. It's me, Wilbur. Tommy relaxed, and then jolting back. Wilbur? Tommy opened his door slowly, unsure of who was waiting on the other side, the king or the brother. But standing at the threshold, his shoulders slumped and his smile tired. It was just Wilbur. Hello, Wilbur said. Can I come in? Tommy rolled his eyes. Techno told you to come, didn't he? The smile slipped from Wilbur's face. Does it matter? He asked exhaustedly. Suppose not. Tommy stood back to let Wilbur inside. Wilbur crept in like a tourist, looking at every inch of Tommy's room like every little thing was a priceless artifact. When had Tommy at last allowed his older brother into his bedroom? Most likely around the same time Wilbur moved his things into the king's quarters. I like this, Wilbur said idly, pointing at an ancient morning star hanging next to the door. Really ties the room together, I think. Cut it, Wilbur, Tommy snapped, the morning's vehemence returning like bitter waves to the shore. Just tell me why you're here. Tommy sighed as he threw himself down on one of the spare seats. We need to talk, Tommy. All right. Tommy leaned against the wall and crossed his arms, watching Wilbur suspiciously. Talk then. Wilbur crossed his legs and returned Tommy's scrutiny tenfold. His dark eyes seemed to be made for the very purpose of staring people down. First of all, I would like to apologize for what I said earlier. You were never an annoyance to me, Tommy, but you are a child. Wilbur held a hand up to silence him. Let me finish, he said, wielding not the authority of a liege, but of a firstborn sibling. You are a child, but that isn't a bad thing. You're allowed to be what you are, and you're young. But That's also the reason why I thought it's best to keep things away from you. In my efforts to protect you, I drove you away, and that's the last thing I want. And you're right. Speaking with Techno did help me come to that conclusion. But we all need Techno's help now and again, don't we? Tommy scoffed, but he knew he couldn't disagree. Wilbur knew it too. Oh wait, I read too far. Give me a moment. I don't need to be protected, Wilbur, Tommy said weakly. Then why do you always look so sad? Tommy's eyes locked on Wilbur's. What? There was a world's worth of pain in Wilbur's expression. Whenever you think no one's watching, you look so sad, Tommy. But I see you. You joke and laugh and shout all day, but the moment you're alone, you get this look on your face, like you're carrying some heavy weight and you're trying to find someone there to set it down, but there's nowhere. I've seen that look before, Tommy. And that's why I'm scared for you, because Father... Don't! Tommy croaked. Don't compare me to him, Wilbur. I am nothing like him. Prove it then. Wilbur suddenly said, making Tommy jerk back against the wall. Do what he never had the guts to do and tell me what's wrong, Tommy. Tell me what you're carrying and I'll help you. Tommy's chest felt tight with the pressure of the decades-old secret. His eyes instinctively scanned the room for an exit, some way out, some way to never speak of this again. He wanted nothing more than to melt into the wallpaper behind him and never see the light of day again. Give me a moment. I'm getting DMs. I need to fix it. Woo! Okay, that's not DMs. It's just at everyone's. Because of course. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna scroll down. Okay. Wilbur's expression softened at Tommy's panic, and he slowly sat back down on the seat. I'm sorry, he said gently. I didn't mean to. He pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a long sigh. I'm so bad at this. Okay. Here. To prove you that I can handle your secret, I'll tell you mine. Tommy's brows furrowed. You have a million secrets, Wilbur. Maybe even more than that. I know. But this is the secret, Tommy. There it was again. The feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a dark, unfathomable chasm. I, said Wilbur, hear voices. He tapped his temple. Right here. Voices that aren't mine, or anyone else's, as far as I know. We're still trying to figure it out. We? Tommy breathed. Techno and I. Ah, of course. Tommy leaned slightly forward, confusion and fear warring in his gut. What do these voices say? Sometimes they're cryptic, vague, talking about fate and strings. Sometimes they just taunt me, and sometimes it's worse. Wilbur took a shuddering breath. So much worse. Wait, where am I? Okay, sorry. And right now? Tommy asked, not sure if he wanted to know the answer. Right now, Wilbur said quietly. They're telling me to kill you. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. He was suddenly very aware of how many weapons, decorative or otherwise, he had on his walls. Wilbur, you can't. I'm not going to do it, Tommy, Wilbur said, sounding hurt that Tommy might even think the opposite. I would never hurt you, but the voices, the saying it's inevitable, that it's your destiny to die by my hand, that this is a story that has been told many times over, and we can't change how it ends. And how does it end? Badly, Wilbur whispered. His tone made it clear that whatever it was, Tommy was not prepared to hear it. Well, you don't actually know what the voices are saying is real, right? Maybe it's all nonsense and it won't actually happen. But it already has. Wilbur swallowed, and both he and Tommy steeled themselves for what he was about to say. 2 months ago, the voices told me there was something coming, that an army was gathering at our northern borders. But we don't have any enemies. That's what I thought too. But I sent some spies to investigate, just in case, and they confirmed it. Wilbur steepled his fingers, his eyes as hard and dark as polished iron. Just like the voices said, a war might be coming, Tommy. What was it that Technoblade had said? Wilbur's not having a very fun week. Tommy might laugh at how huge of an understatement that was, if he wasn't too busy choking on his own tongue. War. Such a small word just for such a big thing. Well, Tommy slid into the floor as his legs gave out. That's it then. Techno and I are trying to make contact with the foreign army's generals, Wilbur said, and Tommy noticed for the first time how many silver hairs Wilbur had acquired, almost glowing in the moonlight, streaming from the windows. We're doing everything we can to stop it from happening, Tommy, but yes, that's it. Those are my biggest secrets. The rest are inconsequential. He took a deep breath as if to steady himself. I think it's your turn, Tommy. Tommy laughed bitterly. After that reveal, anything I say would sound stupid. It won't, Wilbur said resolutely. He leaned back on the seat, giving Tommy a gentle look. Whenever you're ready, Tommy, I'm right here. Tommy drew his legs toward himself and wrapped his arms around his knees, clinging on for dear life. This was too much, too fast. He wanted to yell. He wanted to crack his fist open on the marble statue with Techno's little markings. He wanted to pinch himself and wake up yesterday, when nothing was wrong except for the gnawing pain in his chest that had never gone away, even 9 years later. He wanted his parents. Wait, I read way too far, sorry. I keep doing that. Okay. The world had gone suddenly dark, and in the shadows, Tommy finally let go. You want my secret, Wilbur? He pressed his face against his knees, as if that might hide his shame from the world. I saw him. There it was, the truth, or a confession, or both. That night, I saw him. He heard Wilbur suck in a breath. There was no need to elaborate. Between the two of them, there was only ever one he, and only ever one night. He kissed my hair, and that's what woke me. I saw him walk away from my bed towards my window. I saw him open it. I saw him climb out, or jump out. I want to say he flew out like a bird, but I don't remember that part very well. What I do remember is just lying there, fully awake, knowing something was really wrong. I just laid there. Tommy's eyes began to sting, so he closed them shut before the first of the pathetic tears could fall. Eventually, I climbed out of bed and I went to their room, wanting to believe I just dreamt it all. And that's when I found Mama. He could still it in his mind. He could still it in his mind's eye. He remembered so little of her, but he could never forget how he'd crawled up on the bed next to her, trying to wake her. He could never forget his confusion when she refused to, nor the blinding pain of when he realized why. And most days, Wilbur, that's all I think about. How I was awake and could have stopped him, and I could have made him stay, and you wouldn't have needed to be king so young. I could have spared you from all this, Wilbur, and now everything's gone to trash, and it's all my... A sob tore from his lips, sudden and unrelenting. I want to help you, but I don't know how. Nobody ever taught me how. Tommy, Wilbur's voice sounded so far away. But the worst thing, Tommy continued, trying to ignore that ever-tightening noose around his neck, is that maybe I could have seen it coming. He used to come by your door in the middle of the night when he used to live across the hall. I kept my door open, just a crack. After the first time it happened, just to see if he would come again. And he did. so many times. I used to think he would knock eventually, but he never did. Tommy tightened his hold on himself, shaking with grief and maybe with relief too. I think what he was saying goodbye before he left, Wilbur. For a moment, the only response to his words was silence. Tommy was afraid to look up, to see if Wilbur had left, angry and betrayed. But instead, Tommy felt warm arms encircle him and pull him towards something safe and solid. Oh, sorry, that's so sweet. That's so... Sorry. Sorry. Tommy, Wilbur whispered into Tommy's ear. You were 6. You were 6. But... And that was it. That was what broke Tommy, in the end. He crashed into his brother, wrapping his arms around Wilbur's torso and burying his face into his chest. The tears finally came, a culmination of the 9 years of guilt and paranoia, of stumbling through life, unsure of where he stood with his brother, of fearing that one day Wilbur might find out what he'd failed to do and hate him forever. But this wasn't hate. It was the opposite. Shh. Wilbur ran a hand through Tommy's hair. It's alright, Tommy. Let it all out. It was just the two of them in that moment. There were no voices, no ghosts, no secrets. Just Wilbur and Tommy. Tommy and Wilbur. Welcome back. Sorry. Oh, the scene is just... I want to draw it so bad. I want to draw this scene so bad. Eventually, Tommy's sobbing ended. His cheeks... Oh, sobbing ebbed. Sorry, that's... Where's that? Yeah, it's ebbed. His cheeks were wet and cold from his tears, but he could breathe easier than he ever did. He drew back from the circle of Wilbur's arms and found his brother looking at him with the gentleness that he could never deserve in 1,000 years. I want to draw this so bad. Sorry. See? Wilbur said, delicately brushing stray tears from Tommy's cheeks. Isn't it lighter with someone else to carry it with? Tommy sniffled. You always have to be right, don't you? Well, of course. Otherwise, I'd be stripped of my title as Grand Master of Pretentiousness. The council would have a field day. Tommy laughed wetly. What will your voices say after you suffer such a disgrace? Funnily enough, Wilbur said softly, they're very quiet right now. So what happens now? Tommy whispered into the dark. I don't know, Wilbur confessed, but what I do know is that there should be no more secrets between brothers. Agreed? Agreed. Tommy smiled. No more secrets. Tommy looked as if he... Tommy. Wilbur looked as if he wanted... Wait, sorry. Wilbur looked as if he wanted... Wait, sorry. Where am I? Wilbur looked as if he wanted to say... Okay. Wilbur looked as if he wanted to say something else, but Tommy Tommy would never have the chance to find out what, because at that same moment, Techno burst through the door, his expression like hellfire. Alright, night-night. Wilbur was on his feet in an instant, reaching for a crumpled note Techno was holding out to him. Tommy watched his brother's face drain of all color as his eyes scanned through the message. What? Tommy demanded, his heartbeat ringing in his ears. What does it say? When Wilbur looked back at him, his eyes were bleak and haunted. You wanted to know what conscriptions were for, Tommy? Well, you're about to find out. End of the chapter. Okay, so guys, get some water. I'll give you 2 minutes to get ready, and then we shall continue reading Passerine, next chapter. Chapter 4. We're halfway through, halfway-ish. Yeah, halfway through-ish. And yeah. So guys, I'll give you 2 minutes. Get some water, get some tea or something. And every time I read, for some reason, my throat hurts. So Okay, now. We're saying we should back to the previous page. What? Passerine chapter 4. What? 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 Why is my phone being weird? Okay, my phone is being really weird right now. Okay. That was really weird. Okay. I'm going to read chapter 4 now. So. Oh, what just happened? Are you guys ready? Just give me a thumbs up or ready or a yes if you're ready, and I will proceed to read. Whew. Oh man, chapter 3, my favorite chapter. Oh man, it's so good. I want to draw it so bad. I will draw it. Okay, I'm gonna draw it. You know, I'll draw it one day. I really want to draw. I really want to draw it. Okay. Chapter 4. My birds of a kind. They look... Sorry. Okay. My birds of a kind. They more and more are looking like centurions. Okay, good. Good that you guys are all ready. Good. Gonna skip the summary. Here's some trigger content. So if you're, if you're a bit sensitive to all these, then please mute the stream. Violence / depictions of violence, assault, and death. Okay, let's go. 3 men stood on a balcony where there once were two. Wait. 3 men stood on a balcony where once there were 2. A mortal king, a mortal prince, and their red-eyed teacher. In the gardens below, travelers were gathering, most weary from their journey from every corner of the vast kingdom. Even now, more were still pouring into the capital city, staring in wide-eyed with confusion. Sorry, burp. A conscription notice tucked into their pockets or crushed between nervous fingers. All able-bodied citizens of the kingdom are called into the king's castle, the letters all said, carried from bustling towns to quiet villages by messengers on the kingdom's most swift-footed horses and courier birds taking to their familiar wind-carved routes. War is coming, and it is time to defend your motherland. The conscription letter had gone on to specify that only those over the age of 18 were to be included in the king's army. Many had chosen to ignore that. Sorry, I know one of those people, and he's like, it's... Sorry. I like Tubbo is great. I like Tubbo. Tubbo's my favorite. Anyways. Many had chosen to ignore that. Among the horde trickling slowly into the heart of the kingdom was a brown-haired boy, a year shy of the stipulated age. He kept the hood of his battered cloak up, so no one could see the traces of boyhood still etched into his skin like a brand. Someone noticed. Sorry, I know that's Tubbo and Nikki. They're both great. It was a girl with hair as pink as the hibiscus she grew in her garden. She lived in the city all her life. Once, a man with the same hibiscus pink hair had walked into her flower shop, his eyes bleak and unfocused. He'd asked her if she had any yellow roses for sale, and had bought it all. It was only later that she realized who the man was, but by then he already left, heading towards the woods that bordered the city. Wait. Okay, there you go. They passed underneath the castle gates, where a woman they had called Captain kept a watchful eye. Wait, I messed up, sorry. She marched along the city streets that had become unfamiliar over the course of a week. She left her garden to the care of an elderly neighbor, A sign was left on her flower shop door, telling hopeful customers that it was closed indefinitely. There were nothing else to do now but follow the course of the crowd, keeping an eye on a stranger that was definitely much younger than her, wondering whether or not he'd outlive her. They passed underneath the castle gates, where a woman they called Captain kept a watchful eye. She was under orders to turn away anyone too young, too sick, too old, but every time she looked into their eyes, she only saw herself. She'd clawed her way out to her position, made sure to earn her reputation, and had stood guard over the royal family for over a decade. It was her stubbornness that got her to where she was, adorned with the medallions from the king, both old and new. It was stubbornness that she saw in these people now. So while she did her duty by barring the way for the youngest, the sickest, and the oldest, if she turned away for a moment when an aged warrior did her best to hide the wrinkles on the backs of her scarred hands, or when a 17-year-old boy pulled his hood over his face, or when a strong-jawed smith from a city limped by her with a broken foot that wasn't quite healed yet, well, she would consider that her duty too. Sorry. By the time the boy and the flower shopkeeper found themselves in the garden, it was crowded. People stood shoulder to shoulder, pushing and pulling like a tide on the trampled remains of a dead queen's flowers. The shopkeeper grimaced as her boots traded across the petals and stems, violently returning them to their soil. The boy did not notice the flowers at all. He was staring up at the balcony, looking at the man whose call was answered by thousands. Most of them had never seen their king before, but they've all heard the stories of a boy crowned on the eve on his 16th birthday after his father's mysterious disappearance, or death, or assassination, depending on which rumors you believed, and guided by a strange advisor. A kingdom of peace would never had any reason to know the name Technoblade, but those who heard the folk story of a red-eyed emperor from a cold and distant land whispered amongst themselves at the resemblance, or the coincidence, or whatever word they could use to explain the uneasiness brewing in their gut. I read a little bit too much, I'm sorry. Alright. Yeah, practicing is very important. The stories also said that the king was kind and generous, with a story-eyed ambition that came with his youth, and that the younger prince would charm 1,000 detractors with his wit and humor. Yeah, the emoji. Standing together, they seemed to be as different as night and day, one dark, one light. But no one would deny the shared brotherhood etched into their regal bearing, both products of a boyhood almost drowned in etiquette and decorum. The prince shifted closer to his brother. "That's a lot of people, Will," he murmured. The king's eyes were unreadable in the hazy light of the clouded afternoon. "Not enough," he replied. The tutor crossed his arms as he surveyed the gathering crowd, already calculating battle positions and drafting strategies. This was, after all, not his first war, nor did he think it would be his last. "I'll oversee training as much as I can, for as long as we have time. I've identified some potential battalion leaders from the guards and the people who came earlier. I'll delegate the responsibility of training their newer recruits." "Which is most of them," Wilbur pointed out. "They never had a reason to learn how to fight before this." You underestimate your people, Wilbur," Technoblade replied patiently. "There are other reasons besides war. Look there. See that person with the bow? They're a hunter, used to shooting down fast-moving targets, which makes them an asset for an archery line. Folks from the mountain regions are used to riding on horseback, so that's our cavalry already established. Miners and smiths are used to swinging sharp and heavy objects around. Give them broadswords instead of pickaxes and hammers, and we'll be ready to go." Wilbur cut him a bemused look. "You sound almost optimistic. Did you hit your head on the wall this morning?" "I've seen worse odds." Tommy scoffed. "This is different from all your war books, Techno. This is real life." He did not notice the knowing looks shared between his brother and their tutor. "Anyway," Technoblade continued, I reached out to mercenary guilds to supplement our offensive. Our coffers can handle the hit after all. The kingdom has only been busy with trade for the decades. And if it all goes bad anyway? Tommy asked quietly. Technoblade's expression hardened. It won't. How can you be so sure? Demanded the young prince. From what I've been hearing, we're nothing more than a bunch of poor saps armed with twigs against this, what do they call themselves? Green Army, Wilbur replied, while taking his eyes off the people below them. Ridiculous name, if you ask me, Technoblade said. Tommy did not laugh, as he usually would. That message you received said they massacred an entire town, Wilbur, he choked out. An entire town. Wiped out overnight, like ants. Wilbur's hands tightened around the balcony railings. His knuckles turned white as he squeezed. They were taken by surprise. We will not be so unfortunate. None of them said the obvious, which was the fact that if Wilbur had not held his secret so close to his chest, the town that once sat in their northern border might have survived. They might have been warned. They would have been saved from their merciless doom. Hypotheticals, Technoblade had told them before, were worthless and only crippled their way forward, but it still sat in the uneasy silence between them, broken only by the tutor saying, "Other towns along the Green Army route have been evacuated. You should be expecting refugees to arrive in the city in 3 days, but the temporary camps will be finished and ready by then." And what's the status of the army itself? Based on the spies' reports, we have half a month. Wait. I burped. Nice. We have half a month, at most, before they arrive at the valley, which gives us another week to prepare the troops before we set out. The army should be done tallying and dividing up weapons by tomorrow, and the caravans have been loaded with other supplies. And the other thing planned? Gathering the materials as we speak. The alchemists are working as fast as they can, given that it's delicate work. But it should be done before we go. Good. Wilbur raised his head towards the sun, breathing in the last sweet winds of spring. As he did, Tommy and Technoblade were the only ones to notice the fresh scratch marks running down the pale column of his throat. Tommy opened his mouth to speak, but it was silenced by a quiet shake of Techno's head. Guess it's time. In one smooth motion, Technoblade jumped onto the balcony railings, balancing precariously like an acrobat on a tightrope, his beloved trident in his hand. He drove the butt of the trident against the railings, producing a sound like a bell tolling, over and over until the crowd was almost silent, their attention caught. Sorry, he's not British. Your king, he shouted. Well, now speak. Wait, sorry, he's shouting. Your king, he shouted. Well, now speak. I suggest you listen. He dropped back between Tommy and Wilbur, who gave him a grateful smile before turning back to their people, their army. Friends, Wilbur began, his voice carrying out over the still crowd, now hanging on to his every word. I see you all from where I stand. I understand you are afraid. You are confused. Years ago, I promised you peace on my father's crown, and now I call you to war. There is nothing less than treason. Rest assured, I will be facing consequences for it. The crowd stirred. Even Tommy looked to his brother in surprise, a question swiftly dying on his lips, but as Wilbur spoke on. But that will be later, the king continued. For now, we face an enemy that has mercilessly slaughtered our brethren on the northern border. That is what we shall keep in mind as we are ready to face them. More than a battle to defend ourselves, this is a war of revenge. We shall remember the innocents lost to the nonsensical greed of our invaders, and I vow to deliver your vengeance on a silver platter. Techno's eyes darkened, but he did not interrupt. His gaze drifted to the marble pavilion, sitting in the distance, right where the crowd stopped. Its chests have been pilfered, the blunting training weapons melted down to make sharper, deadlier blades. The ivy tumbling down from its roof swayed slightly in the wind, offering him a brief glimpse at the empty, dust-covered floor beyond. I read too far. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. He wondered if he'd ever set foot in it again. As the shopkeeper was the only one not watching the king as he spoke of bravery and keeping the faith, instead she followed the tutor's far-off gaze, but all she could see was a small white building, overgrown with weeds. "This will not be the end of our nation," the king said with a note of finality, his dark eyes sweeping across the gathered crowd, but not seeing their faces at all. He spread his arms as if welcoming an embrace from someone no one else could see. "It has stood here for centuries, and it will stand for centuries more. We will see our enemies burning, my friends, and I will scatter the ashes on the graves of the people they took from us. And anyone who survives the fire will wish they had perished in flames, and not by my hands. My only hope is that you might feel the same, and I trust that you are in the most capable hands I could find." He turned to the tutor. "You are in safekeeping and guidance of General Technoblade. Together, we will defend this kingdom or die trying." The silence of the crowd gave way to thunderous applause, the exultant cry of hundreds of people who did not know truly what awaited them on the battlefield. The aged warrior with the scarred hands was intimately familiar with violence, and turned bitterly away from the excitement. She had been like them once, but no longer. They would learn sooner or later, but it would not be a gentle lesson. I don't know who that person is, honestly. However, they were united in some things. They trusted their young king and their prince. They trusted their general, and they wished to see their enemies burn. The boy in the crown felt that unity down to his bones. This is it, he thought. This war was what it meant to be a part of something, to belong. He felt a smile creep onto his face, and soon he was joining the noise, hollering until his lungs began to ache. I want to draw this so bad. Joining in the people's furious glee. He was going to hold the line. He was going to drive the enemy back and protect the land that raised him. And he was going to be a hero. At 17 years old, Tubbo was the oldest he'd ever been, but he never felt so young. Only one person did not seem impressed by the king's words. The tutor-turned-general was staring at the king, his mouth a thin line of disapproval. Since when did I get the promotion? Technoblade asked slowly. Wilbur shrugged, dismissive. You've already been acting like a general anyway. But I, Technoblade. The king's voice turned as cold as he stared his tutor down. You promised to help me. Was that a lie? Technoblade's eyes flashed dangerously. Careful, Wilbur, he said quietly, forgetting who you're talking to. Wilbur blinked, his eyes suddenly clearing. He opened his mouth for some sort of retort, perhaps an apology, but then there was Tommy, brilliant, loud Tommy, leaning so far over the railings, Technoblade had to pull him back by the back of his shirt. When he turned to them, he was beaming, his eyes bright in the afternoon gloom. We're going to win, Tommy said, his ears still ringing with the crowd's approval. We're actually going to win, aren't we? Wilbur and Techno exchanged one glance, and all was forgiven. The conversation shelved for another day. The general still looked at the king with something close to concern, and the dark circles under the king's eyes were getting harder and harder to ignore each day. But none of that mattered anymore. If Tommy said they were going to win, then by the gods, neither of them would tell him otherwise. Now when he looked the happiest he'd ever been in a month. By this time the next month, we will be back to worrying about trade routes and bothersome sycophants, Wilbur assured them. The heck's a sycophant? Oh, God. The king gave his brother a look that was equal parts annoyed and adoring. Remind me to hire a better linguistics tutor for you when we get home. I can't read. Tommy rolled his eyes. Good luck finding someone that can stand me. That's Wilbur's voice. Good luck finding someone that can stand me. I'll chase anyone away in 3 days at most. But you'll hold that darn life on it. Wilbur grinned at Technoblade. I can think of one person. Techno, will you finish that sentence? Technoblade drawled in his usual monotone manner. And I will end your bloodline right on this balcony. I will throw you off. Witnesses be darned. As the king and prince dissolved into laughter, for one shining moment, children again, Technoblade found himself smiling. The sky was dark and bleak, but there on that balcony, there was sunlight. It's you and me, said Technoblade, putting one hand on top of Tommy's head, the other on Wilbur's shoulder. One more time. The blue valley stretched before Tommy, disappearing into the hazy horizon. The two mountains that bordered the valley rose menacingly in front of him, twin endpoints of the imposing mountain ranges that served as the kingdom's natural borders. A river ran through the middle of the valley, lit into liquid gold by the sun slowly rising over the distant hills. I burped. All in all, Tommy thought as he breathed in the cold dawn air, this would not be the worst looking place to die in. The valley was named after the blue irises that thrived in it, lining the cliff sides and blooming along the river banks. But they were not the flowers Tommy was in search for. He ventured down the hillside, keeping his eyes close to the ground. He rolled up his pant legs to keep them dry from the morning dew that clung onto the underbrush, but it left nothing below his knees, vulnerable to the traps that had been set around camp. One wrong move and he'd lose a foot for his troubles, but he was determined to make the trip worth it. It had been a week since they'd arrived at the valley, and while that meant most of their preparations were finished, it also meant that the other shoe would drop any day now. Tommy could feel it breathing down his neck. The only way to combat it was relentless distraction, keeping his hands busy. So he traveled down the hill, one careful step at a time, until a flash of yellow in his periphery caught his attention. Found ya, he said, making his way over to the flowers, clustered over a rock, almost indistinguishable from their blue iris neighbors, if it weren't for the golden center that earned him for the name. Tommy strolled back into camp. He had a fistful of morning glories clutched in his hand and a grin on his face. Everybody was already awake, clustered around cook fires, going through morning exercises or just milling about. Someone had brought their guitar, and its soft music echoed above the sounds of conversation and laughter. People raised their heads when Tommy passed, calling his name or waving at him to join them for breakfast. He cheerfully declined, but not before exchanging I can't read, I'm so sorry. Exchanging jokes and pleasantries with some of the more familiar folk. It was easy to miss the shadows this way. In the right light, he might miss the tousled hair of those that had not slept in days, or the bleak look on the captain's face, quickly hidden by a strained smile, or the smell of sulfur that clung to their clothes like a nasty, relentless parasite. It's pretty tragic, isn't it? The question stopped Tommy dead in his tracks. He turned towards the person who asked, and found himself in front of a girl seated by a grindstone, slowly sharpening a small blade. What? Pardon? The girl smiled as she nodded towards the flowers in his hands. Morning glories. They wilt the same day they bloom, lasting only until the sun sets. She paused. Maybe less, now that you've picked them. Tommy flushed with embarrassment, suddenly getting the urge to hide the bouquet under his back, as if that might somehow erase what he did. I'm sorry, I didn't think about. The girl simply laughed. No, don't be. I would be the world's biggest hypocrite if I told you. I would be the world's biggest hypocrite if I told you off for picking flowers. At Tommy's confused look, she explained, I own a flower shop back in the city. Oh. Tommy looked down at the flowers clutched in his hand, his brows furrowing as he thought. It is sad, I suppose, that they die so quickly, but aren't they beautiful while they last? The grindstone slowly ground to a halt as the girl merely sat there, staring at Tommy with an inexplicable expression on her face. Well, thought Tommy, this is awkward. You know, Your Highness, the girl said at length. You remind me of someone. He's a soldier in his camp, and about your age as well. He's off summer training right now, but I have this feeling that if you'd only meet, you'd make good friends. Tommy opened his mouth to reply, but found he could only nod in agreement. The girl gave him a small, sad smile, as if she could understand his silence even more than if he had spoken, and went back to her work. Tommy pried his feet from the ground and began walking towards the heart of the camp, but the girl's words followed close on his heels. That was a true tragedy, wasn't it? More than the flowers that only bloomed for a day, the bittersweet devastation was in the what-ifs. Tommy didn't understand why, but he found himself lingering on one scenario. A different life where he had met that person that he reminded the girl of, where neither of them were young soldiers. You'd make good friends, she'd said, but that wasn't right. Tommy felt inexplicably, down to his bones, that if he'd ever met that boy, they would be brothers. Tubbo. Wait, I read it too fast. It was only until the royal tent was in view that Tommy realized he even asked the girl for the boy's name. If we move this battalion there, we could provide cover, but we could also run the risk of... Tommy looked up. He hadn't even realized he'd entered the tent. He found Wilbur standing at the large desk that took up most room, leaning over a map littered with small carved pieces that represented various troop positions. Behind him, his hair unbound, was Technoblade. Both were staring at Tommy with concern. What? He demanded. You're crying, Tommy, Wilbur said softly. Tommy touched his free hand to his cheek and was surprised to find it come away wet. He rubbed furiously at his eyes until they were clear of tears. This was not the time. This was not the time. He strode deeper into the tent, ignoring the worried look Wilbur threw Techno, and Techno's answering shrug. Tommy stopped at one corner of the map and pointed to a cluster of carved archers clustered on what would be the hill they were currently on. We don't need that many, he said determinedly. Just one. Just you, Wilbur. Wilbur seemed frustrated by the change of topic, but he had no choice other than to follow his little brother's lead. You're overestimating my aim, Tommy. Tommy drifted away from the map, throwing himself on a spare chair in the corner. He gestured Techno over, and the general silently complied. You always pull through what matters, Tommy said, as Techno took a seat on the ground in front of him, his back to Tommy. As Tommy gathered Technoblade's hair into his lap, he added, except the many, many times you lost a duel with Techno. Normally, this would warrant a chuckle or, at the very least, an indignant eye roll, but Wilbur simply leaned over the map again. His expression shuddered once more. Techno turned to Tommy and whispered, we must not break his intense, beast-like focus. Tommy snorted. The only beast-like thing about him is that tangled lines made he calls hair. Wilbur's head snapped to glare at them both. I heard that. Of course you did, Techno said, turning back away. Lions have an unparalleled sense of hearing. Tommy laughed quietly to himself as he began braiding Techno's hair, his fingers making knots with the ease that came over the years of practice. This had been their only routine. This had been their routine for the past week. Wilbur would pore over the battle plans with wide-eyed obsession that got more and more frenzied by the day. Techno would call out every flaw in Wilbur's proposed changes until they encountered one that seemed to be actually useful, and Tommy would where am I? Wilbur would pore over the battle plans with wide-eyed obsession that got more and more frenzied by the day. Techno would call out every flaw in Wilbur's proposed changes until they encountered one that seemed actually useful, and Tommy would braid. It kept his hands busy. If it weren't for the distraction of Techno's hair between his fingers, Tommy would most likely join the flower shop grill over the grindstone, mindlessly polishing his spear until doomsday. Sometimes, Tommy would wake up in the middle of the night and find his brother still awake, reviewing their plans and muttering to himself, or not to himself, the voices. The mysterious, omniscient, creepy as heck voices that had plagued his brother for years. Tommy began to weave the morning glories he'd found into Techno's hair, to hide the fact that his hands had started shaking. 2 nights before had been the worst of it. Tommy had been awoken by the noise of glass shattering. Opening his eyes, he found Wilbur standing over his cot, a shard of broken glass clutched into Tommy's hand and raised over his head, ready to strike it into Tommy's chest. Tommy had stopped breathing completely. "Will?" he said, his voice coming out meek and trembling. "What meant to kill you?" Wilbur had croaked, blood dripping down his arm from how tightly he was holding the broken glass. "We're going to kill you, Tommy. It's fate. It's meant to be." "Wilbur," Tommy had to reach out at the clutch of his brother's shirt. "Wilby, please don't hurt me." Wilbur had blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening with unushed tears. "You haven't called me that in such a long time." The glass shard had dropped, but not into Tommy's flesh, into the ground beside his cot, driven into the soft dirt. Wilbur had kneeled beside him for the rest of the night, whispering apologies that chased Tommy into his uneasy sleep. By morning, Wilbur seemed to have completely forgotten the incident, or had chosen to ignore it completely, and Tommy was already plucking flowers off the hillside with shaky fingers. Tommy looked up now to find a white cloth tied around Wilbur's left hand, where the glass had cut into his skin. It was the only evidence that that night had not been a dream, and that Wilbur's voices were slowly taking over. "It must be the stress," Tommy thought as he braided the last of the morning glories into Techno's hair. When the war was over, Wilbur would be back to normal again, and Tommy could go back to not being absolutely terrified of his older brother. "Done," Tommy said at last, flicking Techno's finished hair over Techno's shoulder. "Finally." Techno stood and plucked one of the morning glories off his hair. He tucked it behind Tommy's ear before moving over to one side of the chest tucked under the table. "Consider this a sign of my gratitude." He opened the chest and pulled out something dark and folded. When he unfurled it, Tommy shot to his feet, his eyes going wide at the blue-red coat Techno had held up, its golden buttons gleaming, the royal coat of arms stitched over where Tommy's heart would be. "They finished it." Tommy can actually help the laugh that bubbled out of him. "They actually finished it." "Gosh, Tommy," Techno said with a small smile. "It's just a uniform." But it wasn't just that. And Techno knew it. He and Wilbur had received their own uniforms weeks before, the general and the king and their bold colors. In the chaos of the preparation, no one had noticed the prince following in their wake in a simple white tunic until the very last minute. And now the tailors had done it. They'd actually finished it. Tommy bounded up to Techno, grinning so hard he thought his cheeks might split from pure glee. Techno rolled his eyes, but held out the coat for Tommy to slip into. It fit perfectly. Tommy spun around in a small circle before giving Techno a mocking bow. "Said General?" Techno returned the gesture. "Your Highness." "You too," Wilbur said, and Tommy could hear the smile in his voice, however faint. "Oh, so stupid." Tommy waltzed over to his brother, knocking the carved piece that Wilbur was about to put down on the map. Over the sounds of Wilbur's protest, Tommy grabbed his hands and pulled him along, humming a vaguely familiar tune, spinning him in slow circles that could be called a dance under the loosest of definitions. Wilbur went slack as Tommy continued to hum the song, allowing Tommy to spin him more and more. I can't believe you still remember that, Wilbur said softly, his expression unfathomable. Remember what? That song. And then they heard it. The sound that turned Tommy's blood cold. The sound that made Tommy and Wilbur freeze in their tracks. The sound that made Techno reach instinctively towards both of them. The drums of war, echoing over camp, eclipsing the music of a guitar, the conversations of friends, the screeching of a blade against a grindstone, the thud, thud, thud of a 17-year-old soldier practicing his archery against an oak tree, the thud, thud, thud of an army's collective heartbeat, the thud, thud, thud of 1,000 feet marching closer and closer. The enemy had arrived at Blue Valley. They emerged from the mist like specters, the hazy sunlight glinting off their polished blades. Up on the hill, Techno could see them moving through the valley in a steady stream, the soldiers indistinguishable in their tight formation. At the front, someone bore their flag, 2 swords crossed in the simple green background. The sight of it made Techno ball up his fist with a sudden unidentified anger. This was it. It seemed like the entirety of the Green Army was here, as expected. While the valley would serve as a choke point in the Royal Army's favor, it was also the only direct path towards the heart of the kingdom. So now, both sides were going to throw all their pieces on the board. One decisive battle, a quick end. Only one army will emerge from this valley intact, and Techno would be darned if it wasn't Wilbur's. Techno turned to the king standing beside him. Are you ready? Wilbur's eyes were locked on the mountains. Ready as I'll ever be. The camp behind him was empty. Everyone was in position, moving like clockwork under orders that they'd been practicing for days. The only ones left on the hill were Wilbur, Tommy, and Techno, and the archers. Tommy bounded up to them at last, his chest heaving with effort. They send up the flare, he announced, breathlessly. It's go time. Wilbur turned towards the group of archers behind him. Between them was a raging campfire, sending flickering shadows over Wilbur's face as he took one arrow from his quiver and dipped its cloth-covered point into the flames. The dozen archers, the best of the best, handpicked by Wilbur himself, copied him wordlessly. The cloth, smothered in a special incendiary fuel, would burn faithfully until it reached its mark. Wilbur turned back towards the valley, knocking the arrow into his bow. With a deep breath, he pulled the arrow back and aimed towards the sky. Behind him, the archers did the same. Hold, he ordered. The Green Army marched closer. Hold! Techno felt a hand close around his, nails digging into his palm, and looked to find Tommy staring intently at the encroaching forces, his eyes unblinking. They were close enough now that Techno could see the glare of his dawning sun bouncing off their breastplates. Wordlessly, Techno squeezed Tommy's hands. Now, Techno thought. It has to be now. At the same time, Wilbur called out, Fire! 101 burning arrows arched out over the valley, like comets of red and gold. The Green Army paused, perhaps in confusion at the pathetic display of force. Just 13 arrows soaring across the air. It would not even hit their front lines. But that didn't matter. They were not intended to hit the target. They were not the intended target. Once upon a time, Wilbur's aim had been so poor, it would have taken nothing short of divine intervention to correct it. So Techno corrected it. Now, Wilbur shot true. His arrow landed amongst the weeds, and then there was fire. It felt like the whole valley was set ablaze, the heat searing Techno's skin even from where he stood. The burning arrows had ignited a line of fire that ran horizontally through the valley, cutting the Green Army off completely. Soldiers from the Royal Army had been doused been doused that area in the ever-burning fuel in the moment they saw the enemy coming, and then promptly fell back into the mountain, taking shelter for the next phase. The fire would not hold them off forever. Okay. Wilbur gave a signal, and the archers scattered to their next positions, leaving the three of them truly alone, watching the next wall of fire for the first signs of life. It came in the form of a man in a white cloak, stepping through the flames like it was merely an inconvenience. He shrugged off the heat, flicking an ember off his shoulder before his eyes found them on the hill. He pointed his sword straight at Wilbur. That isn't a white flower. That isn't a white flag of surrender, Techno, Wilbur said quietly. No, it's not, Techno replied, finally letting go of Tommy's hand and reaching for his trident. It was a long shot anyway. A little heat is nothing to mass murderers. You should know, his voice purred. This is not time for your sass, Techno thought back, as if that might stop the age-old melody that was starting to play in his head. The rest of the enemy army followed after the man in white, less gracefully but stubbornly, like ugly croaches crawling over the valley. And then there was a battle cry, ringing from all directions of the royal army, appeared from their hiding spots, in the trees or in the weeds, from the river and from the mountains, and catching their enemy by surprise. But the green army was well trained. They recovered swiftly, and though most of their army was stuck behind the fire, they were biting back. It wasn't long until bodies were dripping, and not just the enemies. Techno's hand tightened around his trident as the valley filled with sounds of war, but it was not out of fear. Techno would never admit it out loud, but he could feel something almost like excitement pounding through his veins. This was familiar. This was something he knew, deep in his bones. He could do without failure. Being Wilbur's teacher and then Tommy's, that had been terrifying. But this was nothing. This was just another battle to fight, just another war to win. We need to help, Tommy said, his feet already moving down the hill. Wilbur's hand shot out, dragging Tommy backwards. Both Techno and Tommy looked at him in surprise, but Wilbur was looking past them, at the carnage happening right below their feet, his eyes dark as the earth of a freshly dug grave. Wilbur? He asked in astonishment. Wilbur blinked rapidly, like he was coming out of a dream. Not yet, he said quietly. Remove my earphones. Ah. Okay. What do you mean, not yet? Tommy demanded, pulling himself out of Wilbur's grip. All people are dying down there. Wilbur. Techno spun Wilbur by the shoulders towards him. We have to go, now. Wilbur took a rattling breath. I know. He glanced at Tommy, standing beside them with his face drawn in confusion. But I can't let Tommy. Don't talk about me when I'm not here. Don't talk about me when I'm not here. Tommy spat angrily. Wilbur, this is neither the time nor place to underestimate me. We need to go. Tommy, Wilbur said, staring at Tommy in shock. I never underestimate you. Then prove it. Let's go. You're right. Tired resignation colored Wilbur's words. But stay close to me. He looked grimly back at Techno. Don't lose yourself out there. Techno could hear the warning in his voice. Take your own advice, Your Majesty. Techno replied sourly, taking in Wilbur's wide eyes and trembling hands. I'm serious, Techno. Wilbur's expression hardened as he lowered his voice, speaking to Techno and Techno only while Tommy was distracted by the fight below. This is a direct order from your king. Keep them in check. He thinks he can control you, the voice whispered. He thinks he is your master. Will you prove him right? Like the loyal little dog you are? I promise, Wilbur, Techno said. After all, domesticated dogs, someone once said, still bite. All right, Wilbur said, shouldering his bow with a look of determination. Let's go to war, boys. The first time the captain killed someone, she was 15. He would have killed her. He had seen it in his eyes, lost to a drunken frenzy in a small, lonely tavern far from here. He'd come at her with his heavy hands, and so she'd taken a bottle from one of the tables and broke it against the side of his head. And when that hadn't been enough to stop him, she shoved the sharp pieces clean into his throat. She'd ran from the tavern right after, ran from the town, and didn't stop running until she reached the kingdom capital, where a king with mercy sewn into his smile had offered her a job, a home, and a life that ensured no man would ever dare to cross her again. But even after all these years, the captain could still remember the feeling of skin giving way beneath the sharpness of her weapon. She could still see the man's face, contorting with pain and disbelief, barely able to process what was happening before the death throes took him. She could still hear him choking on his own blood, gurgling wetly before he was finally still. But there was a moment between the killing and the running where she merely sat beside the corpse of her own doing, numb and empty and cold. The soldiers this time would not be so lucky. She could see it in their faces, the ones who'd never seen a day of violence in their lives, making their first kills right in front of her. She could see some of them hesitate, panic, fall into the same abyss she did once before. Most shook themselves out of it, their brains shelving the damage for another day. But the others stood frozen, caught in their own thoughts until their comrades found them, or their enemies did. The captain could not help. She wanted to, more than anything, because wasn't that her job? Wasn't she meant to protect them? And then another enemy would come flying her way, and all she could think about was staying alive and surviving to the next hour, the next minute, the next breath. The Green Army had already begun to find ways through the wall of fire, and it wouldn't be long until the rest of them would arrive with a vengeance. I keep burping, what? I had a really nice dinner. The captain swung her gladius, deflecting the oncoming blow of an enemy before thrusting her blade deep into his chest. She did not look to see him fall. She was already moving across the battlefield, slicing her way towards a group of royal soldiers pinned between a rocky incline and half a dozen enemies. She took 2 down before the rest noticed her, and the captain found herself facing 4 people at once. With a shield in one hand and her sword in another, there was little the captain could do but face them down. This is it, she thought. This is my final stand. You little jerk, one of them spat at her. You think you're so brave all on your own? Scroll down. They surged towards her, and the captain raised her shield instinctively for a blow that never came. When she looked again, she found all 4 soldiers dead on the ground, with the man in red and blue coat, flowers in his hair, standing over the still twitching bodies. Blood dripped from the prongs of his trident. Too much to have come from the 4 bodies. 4 throwing knives were already missing from the bandolier across his chest, and the expression on his face was cold enough to freeze hell. Stop staring and get to work, soldier, Technoblade said. The very same Technoblade the captain had seen carrying the small prince on his shoulders around the castle, the same Technoblade that shuffled uncomfortably in 2 tight suits at formal functions that he nevertheless always saw through to the end. The same Technoblade that past king, the captain's savior, entrusted with his sons. The captain could barely recognize him. I'm going to drink a little bit of water. But then again, something in the back of her mind told her that she was truly seeing him for the first time. She'd heard the rumors, the whispers, the questions about how he never seemed to change over the years. She disregarded all of that now. He was the man who had just saved her life. Nothing else mattered anymore. She saluted. Sir, yes, sir! With a curt nod, technoblade was off, merely a blur of color cutting the violent path across the sky. A valley. Why did I hear sky? What? His trident flashing in the sunlight. A whimper caught the captain's attention, and she turned back to the royal soldiers that had been trying to rescue. Are you all right? She asked them. One of them, a fresh recruit she did not recognize, blubbered. Who is that? That was your general, she snapped. So you can stop cowering in your corner now. The blade just joined the fight. The laughter was the worst of it. Wilbur could feel it growing louder in his head, the sound of 1,000 voices laughing at a joke he was not privy to, a joke with him as the punchline. But then, the still healing wound on his hand would ache, reminding him of what he'd done and where he was. He was standing on a rock, feet braced against moss, felling distant enemies with arrows. He was King Wilbur, protector of the realm, ruler of the kingdom, leader of the royal army, and he'd brought all these people here, and he was not going to let them down. He could spot Tommy's golden head and bow below him, clearing out the enemies that slipped by Wilbur's shots. He was good, frighteningly good. It was easy to forget how capable Tommy was at destruction. He got so used to seeing Tommy lose against Techno that he'd forgotten that against anyone else Tommy was a force to be reckoned with, all on his own. But that did not do much to dispel the worry tightening in Wilbur's gut. He was, after all, also an older brother. Tommy launched himself at an incoming enemy, spear out. The enemy swung with his sword, but Tommy ducked just in time and swept his leg out to knock the man over. Wilbur saw the spear pierce clean through, and the body was still twitching on the ground before Tommy was whirling around to face another. This one didn't even get a meter near Tommy before Wilbur had put an arrow through their throat. Wait. Another burp. Okay. Tommy whirled around and flashed Wilbur a grin. Not bad, Archer boy. Despite everything, Wilbur managed a small smile. A smile that slipped from his face when a sudden motion flickered in the corner of his vision. Tommy, watch out! Wilbur shouted as the enemy soldier barreled into Tommy. The two of them tumbled into the dirt, a tangle of limbs and blades. Wilbur fumbled for an arrow and found his quiver empty. Shoot, he thought. Shoot! The voices agreed happily. Wilbur hurried, slung his bow over his shoulder, and, in the same breath, unsheathed his twin rapiers from their scabbards. He dropped down from his perch, his teeth rattling on impact, the pain not registering because Tommy's in trouble. The enemy soldier had Tommy pinned to the ground, a sword raised over his head and ready to drop. Tommy was thrashing, desperately reaching for the spear that had been knocked out of his hand, but Wilbur was already kicking the enemy violently off him. The enemy rolled across the ground, allowing Wilbur to stand between him and Tommy. The twin swords flashing menacingly in the flickering firelight. Get away from my brother, he hissed. How touching, the soldier said mockingly. He was different from the others. Wilbur could tell. He didn't know exactly, but he just was. His eyes and hair were as black as coal, in stark contrast to the blood-stained white cloak he wore around his shoulders. You, Wilbur said, brows furrowing. I saw you walk through the fire. How? The man scoffed. You think that little stunt could hurt me? He raised his blade. Upon closer inspection, it looked to be made out of pure obsidian, pitch black all the way down to the hilt. I was born in fire. Are you the leader of this army? Wilbur demanded. He gave a short bark of laughter. Me? No, I'm merely a pawn in this game. A pawn with a grudge to settle. A pawn with a grudge to settle, but still a pawn nonetheless. He grinned. Now show me what he taught you, King. Wilbur didn't need to be told twice. He launched himself at the man, blue irises crunching beneath his feet. Their swords met, and from there it was dance. Blades flashed as Wilbur began pushing the man backwards, but he was matching Wilbur hit for hit. Wilbur thrusted forward with his left sword, but the man dodged fluidly before swinging his sword in a mean arc that would have taken Wilbur's head clean off if he had not stepped backwards. From there, the men launched his offenses, striking from above, but Wilbur managed to cross his rapiers together and blocked the hit just in time. The blow reverberated down to Wilbur's bones, but the man gave him no time to recover, pushing his blade harder against Wilbur's. Wilbur dug his heels into the ground and parried, using the man's weight against him. He'd hoped it would cause the man to stumble and end this matter once and for all, but instead the man swung again, feigning another overhead strike before changing to a side hit at the last moment. Wilbur blocked the blow, but the force of it sent him crashing to the ground. The white-cloaked soldier stood over him, a small smile playing on his lips. "That was disappointing," he said, spinning his sword lazily between his fingers, as if he had all the time in the world. "At the very least, I expected a man trained under the god of blood to, well, actually draw some." Wilbur froze. He glared up at the man standing before him, suddenly understanding. "You're here for Techno." The man stopped spinning his sword. "I'm surprised he told you what he is. It must mean a lot to him." His smile was slow and cold. "That makes this all the more fun." He raised his sword and brought it crashing down. It might have been hours, it might have been days, it might have even been between the space of one breath and another. Technoblade could no longer tell. More and more of enemy were finding ways to breach the wall of fire. The Royal Army's archers were doing their best to snipe them down before they could join the fray, but their dreadful lack of experience was beginning to show. Cracks were forming. They were near breaking point. "No," Techno thought, trident in one hand, a bone-handled chain whip in the other. "Not if I can help it." He found himself in the thick of it, drawn not to the violence but to the sounds of Wilbur's people, his people, calling for help, for God's help. "Blood," the voice demanded. "Blood for the blood god." But Techno didn't want blood. Not today. He wanted justice. "Get down," he told the Royal Army soldiers that had gathered around him. Techno realized with a jolt that they had not come to him to ask for his protection, but to give them theirs. As if their fragile mortal bodies might make a difference when it came to him. "Fools," he wanted to say, but all that came out was, "On the ground, all of you now." They were quick to comply. They dove into the weed just as Techno lashed out its whip, the heavy chain carved in an arc through the air before finding its mark wrapping around the neck of an enemy soldier. Techno pulled sharply, knocking the soldier down. He shook the whip free and spun it around to hit an incoming enemy. Wait. Straight in the head. There was a sickening crunch as the force of the whip crushed bone. Before the body hit the ground, Techno spun the whip towards the other targets, aiming for throats, temples, ankles, anything to pull or crush. He was standing on the eye of the storm, his whip cracking through the air like lightning. When the chain whip rattled back into his hands again, it was wet with blood. "You can get up now," he told the soldiers that were staring dazedly up at him from the ground. "Take care of the stragglers." "What stragglers?" One of them called out incredulously, but Techno was already moving again. He launched himself into the air, for a brief moment flying weightlessly over the carnage. Then he crashed down with his trident, impaling a man to the earth. He pulled the trident out with a sickening squelch and then threw a throwing knife right through the eye of an approaching soldier. Another came running towards him, but he made a quick work of him too. This was his element. This is where he belonged. "More," the voices demanded. "More, more, more." This was not his element. This is not where he belonged. He was under strict orders from the king to keep himself in check, and he would not falter now. And then he heard it. Techno could not explain how he heard it over the sounds of swords clashing and people dying and fires burning, but it was as if his very soul had only been listening for that sound and nothing else. In the far distance, a scream. When he was a child, Tommy had tried to scale the side of a castle. He did not remember the fall, but he remembered the crash. He remembered the feeling of his bones splintering underneath him, the pain so blinding that he almost passed out. He didn't know who eventually found him, but he eventually woke up in his bedroom, his left arm in a sling, and Wilbur asleep by his bedside. Techno had been leaning against a far wall, glaring at him. He's been here for days, Techno had said. You really scared him, Tommy. It was the angry... he's been here for days, Techno had said. You really scared him, Tommy. It was the angriest Techno had ever been at him. That was the moment Tommy understood that what he really meant was that Tommy scared the both of them. As the white-cloaked man's sword broke the shaft of Tommy's spear into Tommy's shoulder, he remembered that pain and felt it 1,000-fold. He felt the blade break through his skin and embed himself in his collarbone, and there was only fire in his veins. Tommy! He felt Wilbur's hand pulling him back, and they both stumbled backwards. Tommy still clutching the broken ends of the spear he tried to shield to Wilbur with. Tommy fell to his knees, the pain making everything go white. I'm going to pass out, he thought. I'm going to die. Little hero, the man grumbled as he approached them once again, the edge of his sword dripping with Tommy's blood. You're only delaying the inevitable. Now sit still as I put you down. Tommy. Wilbur's hands were on him, pressing against his wound. Tommy, come here, I'll fix you. Wilbur, Tommy croaked as the white-cloaked man advanced. Wilbur, the enemy. Say your goodbyes, princeling, the man cackled, raising his sword one final time. Tommy grabbed Wilbur, even as his entire body trembled with the movement, covering his brother's body with his own. He shut his eyes, waiting for the coup de grace. It never came. When Tommy looked back again, he found Technoblade standing over them, blocking the man's sword with his trident. Finally, the man growled, pushing himself against the shaft of Techno's trident. I've been waiting for you, you bloody jerk. Techno cocked his head to the side, considering the man at length. He said monotony, don't know you. The man's eyes hardened. You killed them. You took them both away from me, and you killed them. You took them both away from me, and you don't even remember. He jumped back, cutting the air between them and his sword, splattering the ground by Techno's feet with Tommy's blood. Alright, good night. That's alright. I'll just make you remember. Techno turned to look at Tommy and Wilbur, his expression carefully neutral. He took in Tommy's wound, Wilbur still frantically trying to suppress the blood flow. Techno, Tommy breathed. Techno's claw clenched. Go. He turned back to his enemy, his braid whipping in the wind. Most of the morning glories were gone. Take care of your brother, Wilbur. What? Tommy, let's go. What? Wait. Take care of your brother, Wilbur. What? Tommy, let's go, Wilbur said sharply, and he began to pull Tommy over to the mossy rock he had been standing on. He leaned Tommy against it and bent to the task of securing the gash in Tommy's shoulder. Wilbur ripped the end of his red and blue coat and began wrapping it around Tommy's shoulder. I can't see, Wilbur, Tommy protested, straining to look beyond Wilbur's head. You don't need to see that, Wilbur insisted grimly, tightening the cloth around the wound. You don't want to see that. See what? Tommy demanded, his throat aching. When had he started screaming? Wilbur, we need to help him! Before Wilbur could reply, there was a loud crack, like thunder, making them both flinch. Wilbur turned towards the sound, just enough for Tommy to catch a glimpse of the fighting over his shoulder. Just enough for him to see Technoblade raise the man up by his collar and drive him straight to the ground, shattering the earth once more. Okay, wait. Okay. How far are we into this? Oh man, there's so much. Okay, wait. I'm gonna check something. Alright. I'm going to stop reading now. Put a bookmark on that. Yeah. Oh, I bookmarked. Okay. So we're just gonna end it here. I'll continue reading this tomorrow. And yeah, most likely either I'm gonna read the rest of Passerine next tomorrow, or I will play Minecraft. I'll see what I want to do tomorrow. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, juice happens in this chapter, stuff like that. Yeah. Also, I'm probably gonna be drawing some of these scenes because honestly, reading it with my voice, because I listened to an audiobook of it. Reading it myself, like, I really want to draw some of these scenes, like my interpretation of these scenes. So I will be doing that. Anyways, good night, everybody. It's 12 a.m. over here, so I have things to do tomorrow. So yes, good night. Make sure you drink some water. I don't know. Do anything to help make you sleep. Yeah, drink some water, drink some tea. Make sure you put those blankets on. Make sure you're nice and cozy before you sleep. And yeah, good night. Not you, Siri. Anyways, good night. Bye. What? Who's still lurking? I'm about to end potato, so yep. Okay. Bye. Good night. Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. I love you guys. I will see you tomorrow. I will stream as fast as I can since I have Labor Day off, and yeah. So yeah, I'm probably gonna stream for a long time. I could do an overnight stream. That would be so pog. I have to ask Potato if he wants to do that. It would be so pog. I could ask Potato if he wants to do an overnight stream with me or something. And Zane, maybe Potato and Zane. Maybe, yeah, or maybe Zane. I'll ask them both. So yeah. Yeah. So probably an overnight stream tomorrow. Yeah. Good night, everybody. Sleep nice. Sleep well. Bye.